The story of pepper isn't just about flavoring food, it built empires and destroyed nations. Welcome back everyone to Hidden History Stories. In today's episode, we're uncovering how a single peppercorn once worth more than silver drove 9 Dutch merchants to risk everything in 1595. Their gamble shattered Portugal's monopoly, gave birth to the world's first multinational corporation, and unleashed a brutal empire that reshaped 2 continents. But before we begin, make sure to subscribe, like this video, and share it with anyone who loves exploring the past. Your support keeps these stories alive. Now, let's dive in. Picture this. A single peppercorn was literally worth more than its weight in silver in 16th century Europe. Men would kill for it. Nations would go to war over it. And in 1595, 9 Dutch merchants were about to risk everything to steal the most jealously guarded trade secret in the world. It's a cold autumn night in Amsterdam, 1595. 9 men huddle in a cramped room above a warehouse, candlelight flickering across stolen Portuguese maps spread on the table. The wind howls outside, but these merchants barely notice. For decades, Portugal had controlled every grain of pepper that entered Europe. They guarded their sailing routes to the Spice Islands like state secrets. Anyone who tried to break their monopoly simply disappeared. But now, here's where it gets interesting. These Dutch traders had managed to get their hands on actual Portuguese charts and sailing instructions. Cornelis de Houtman, the group's leader, traced his finger along the marked route. "Gentlemen," he whispered, "we're going straight to the source." But why were these Amsterdam merchants uniquely positioned to challenge a centuries-old Portuguese monopoly? Here's the secret. The Dutch had just thrown off Spanish rule in their brutal 80 Years' War, and in doing so, they'd become Europe's most innovative maritime power. While other nations built massive slow galleons, the Dutch perfected the fluid, lighter, faster ships that could carry more cargo with smaller crews. April 20, 1595. 4 Dutch ships slip out of harbour under cover of darkness. The Mauritius, Amsterdam, Hollandia, and Dufken. On board, 249 men who have no idea they're about to make history. The journey to the East Indies was a floating nightmare. Picture this. You're crammed into a wooden box barely bigger than a modern apartment, sailing through waters that could kill you a dozen different ways, storms that could snap your mast like a twig, pirates who'd slit your throat for a handful of coins, and then there was the scurvy. By the time they reached Madagascar, 60 men were already dead. Their teeth had fallen out, their legs swelled like balloons, and purple bruises covered their bodies like some medieval plague. Now picture this moment. June 1596, after more than a year at sea. The Dutch sailors catch their first glimpse of Java rising from the ocean like an emerald pyramid wreathed in mist. They thought they'd reached paradise. They had no idea they were about to unleash hell. The harbour at Bantam was like nothing they'd ever seen. Hundreds of ships from across Asia crowded the waters. The air itself seemed to shimmer with wealth. You could literally smell the money: cloves, nutmeg, cinnamon, and that precious black pepper. But here's what the Dutch didn't understand yet. This wasn't just about buying spices and sailing home. This was a complex web of relationships, traditions, and power that had taken centuries to build. Meanwhile, back in Lisbon, Portuguese merchants were completely unaware that their monopoly was being challenged. For generations, they'd controlled every grain of pepper through a rigid system of royal licenses and fixed prices. The Sultan of Bantam knew exactly what these pale strangers wanted, and he was about to teach them their first lesson in Asian politics. Here's something that'll blow your mind. The pepper trade wasn't some simple market transaction, it was an art form. Picture entire villages in the hills around Bantam where every family devoted their lives to growing these little black pearls. Then came the magic. Those green berries would be spread on woven mats under the blazing tropical Sunday. Slowly, day by day, they'd wrinkle and darken until they became the black gold that Europeans would literally die for. But here's where it gets complicated. The Dutch thought they could just sail in and start buying. What they found was a trading network so sophisticated it made European commerce look like child's play. Chinese merchants had been perfecting quality control for centuries. Arab traders commanded relationships stretching from Mecca to Southeast Asia. Local rulers controlled access to the best growing regions with iron fists. The Portuguese hadn't succeeded through superior firepower alone. They'd spent decades carefully building relationships, one handshake at a time. February 1597. After nearly 2 years in hell, the Dutch expedition finally begins its journey home. But here's the brutal truth. Of the 4 ships that left Amsterdam, only 3 remain. The Duifken, lost to shipworms in a storm that swallowed it whole near Sumatra. And the men? Of the 249 who sailed with dreams of wealth, fewer than 90 lived to see Holland again. But in the holds of those 3 surviving ships lay something extraordinary. 245 bags of pepper, plus nutmeg, cloves, cinnamon, and exotic woods that would set Amsterdam on fire with excitement. Those 245 bags? They were worth roughly 400 guilders, more than Amsterdam's entire annual grain trade. A single successful voyage had generated wealth equivalent to what the city's biggest merchants made in a decade of traditional commerce. When those ships finally sailed up the Zuiderzee in August 1597, church bells rang across the city. Crowds packed the docks, staring in wonder at the strange, aromatic cargo. The financial returns? Absolutely spectacular. Despite losing ships and men, the investors made fortunes overnight. More importantly, they'd proven something that would change the world forever. The Portuguese monopoly could be broken. Now here's where the story gets truly terrifying. The success of de Houtman's voyage triggered a feeding frenzy. Between 1598 and 1601, 15 separate Dutch expeditions set sail for the East Indies. Competition between Dutch companies became so fierce it was destroying profits for everyone. So in 1602, the Dutch government did something revolutionary and monstrous. They forced all the competing companies to merge into one supreme entity, the Verenigde Oost-Indische Compagnie, the VOC, the Dutch East India Company. But this wasn't just any company. This was the world's first true multinational corporation, a business entity that would become the template for modern global capitalism. Picture a corporation with the power to wage war, sign treaties, build armies, and establish colonies. A business with its own government, its own military, its own empire. It was capitalism with teeth, and it was hungry. Meet Jan-Pieter Coen, appointed Governor-General in 1619. If de Houtman was the dreamer, Coen was the nightmare made flesh. Coen had a simple philosophy. We cannot carry on trade without war, nor war without trade. And nowhere did this philosophy prove more devastating than in the Banda Islands, the only place on Earth where nutmeg grew naturally. These 10 tiny islands had maintained their independence for centuries, playing European traders against each other while carefully controlling their precious nutmeg monopoly. The English East India Company had established trading posts there too, competing directly with Dutch interests. But here's what made this conflict even more brutal. This wasn't just about Dutch greed, it was about eliminating English competition once and for all. Coen decided that independence and English competition was bad for business. What happened next would horrify even hardened European observers. In 1621, Cohen launched what he called a pacification campaign against the Banda Islands. Using superior Dutch firepower and tactical surprise, his forces systematically conquered every island. But conquest wasn't enough for Cohen. He wanted total control. Picture this horror of an estimated 15 Bandanese people, fewer than one, zero survived the Dutch takeover. The Dutch then repopulated the islands with their own colonists and imported slaves. Within a few years, they'd created a nutmeg plantation system that would generate enormous profits for centuries. The world's nutmeg monopoly was now Dutch. The price? An entire civilization wiped from the face of the earth. By the mid-1600s, the VOC had become the most powerful corporation in human history. It controlled vast territories across Southeast Asia, commanded armies larger than most European nations, and generated wealth that transformed Amsterdam into Europe's financial capital. Those elegant canal houses you see in Amsterdam today, built with pepper money. The Dutch golden age of art, science, and exploration, funded by Asian spices. But here's the truth that few history books tell you. Every peppercorn that graced a European table carried with it the blood of countless Asian peoples. Every nutmeg cake baked in a Dutch kitchen represented villages destroyed, families torn apart, civilizations erased. What began as 9 Amsterdam traders seeking pepper profits had evolved into something monstrous. A colonial system that would endure for centuries and fundamentally alter the relationship between Europe and Asia. The Dutch East India Company proved that commercial enterprise, backed by state power and superior military technology, could overcome any traditional boundary. Those 9 merchants meeting in a candlelit room in 1595 thought they were just trying to make some money in the spice trade. Instead, they unleashed forces that would reshape 2 continents. The pepper they sought was indeed worth its weight in silver. The question history forces us to ask is this: was it worth its weight in human blood? In the end, the Pepper King's gambit succeeded beyond their wildest dreams and failed in ways they never imagined. The merchants won their fortune but lost their souls in the process. That was the end of the story of the Pepper King, the tiny spice that built fortunes, toppled empires, and reshaped the world. If you enjoyed this journey, remember to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss more hidden history stories. And tell me in the comments, what is your favorite historical era?